I hope that you'll find that these are a pretty interesting piece of software. There's a couple of documents that were sent to you a little earlier. One labeled as case study, and the other one is labeled Efficient Productive Time-Saving Solutions, which is actually the brochure belonging to the professional tools. Christine is going to be sending you an agenda that you should be getting in your email here pretty quickly. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce myself and then have everyone introduce themselves who's attending the meeting. Pardon me, Christine? Okay. All right. My name's Dave Caldwell. I'm one of the lead consultants here at Maynard Costerisan. I've been involved with Great Plains for over 15 years, and I am going to show you a piece of software that not many people know about, a piece of software that is really beginning to gain some popularity with our Great Plains community of users, and has turned out to be a pretty formidable piece of software and has found great uses with a lot of folks. So if I could, I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves and tell us, you who are attending, great. For those of you who are in your office, I hope you have some sort of treat or some kind of morsel to chew on while we're talking along the way. Normally the way I conduct these lunch and learns are pretty informal, and I do like to have some interaction along the way. But according to what Christine was telling me here is that if we unmute, you folks might get who are on our GoToMeeting may get a lot of background noise, and we don't want that to happen. So I'll try to offer that up. You do have the ability within GoToMeeting to also send chats along the way, and Christine will be monitoring that. So if anything, she can be your eyes and ears along the way if you have any questions. So don't hesitate a moment to use that end of it as well. Anyway, I want to just give you a little bit of, all right. Okay. The toolkit is really kind of a graduation beyond what I was telling you for just the casual end user or the SA who's in and just administering the system. The toolkit was actually designed to go a little further technically within the system and recreate damaged objects or a damaged general ledger account index file. Now, this particular tool is a little archaic in that it was one of the first tools that they came out with when the tool set was first created back under version 7 of the software. This kind of operation takes a little more finesse, and essentially what it is a tool that's used in order to create different types of objects at the SQL level belonging to the overall software in order to overcome an error that you may be getting in the system as a result of an improper exit out of the system, a damaged stored procedure, something that's damaged that's gone wrong with the database can be at least a first entry in correcting what might be wrong. So what I'm saying here is that this thing for the toolkit, recreating SQL objects and rebuilding is something that you need to carefully use and carefully weigh out whether or not it makes sense to getting in and using something like this. So you can see that there's some selections that have to be made here with this particular tool as to what part of Great Plains and its data out there needs to be repaired, if any kinds of rebuilding of indices across the tables, recreating selected tables. It's one, again, not for the faint at heart here, because some of this stuff actually will destroy a table and recreate it, that is if there's some suspicion that there's something wrong. So it is a tool out there. It does come with the professional tools, but it's not necessarily someone who's unskilled at SQL or doesn't know the underpinnings of Great Plains that they should use something like that. But it is there. Okay? The menu inquiry utility. We'll talk about that one. Okay? Now, for those of you particularly who are pull-down menu users, this is your ability to being able to control what people see on a menu. So oftentimes what you'll see, particularly in my case here, is that when you look at my pull-down menus, you're going to see an awful lot of things that maybe might be added to the menu of which you possibly may not have registration keys for to open up. that part of the program, but yet the menu item is still there. So how can you go about controlling that? Or another scenario would be is if you are in a pull-down menu user as an example, and you want to remove something that has been added to the system that you as a user does not use, but you are licensed to use in the system, you have a way of controlling that and taking that off of the menu. So when we look at the professional tool set and the menu utility inquiry, okay, I can simply go in and make choices here as to whether or not I want to enable, make them available, and show them on my menu. So I can disable certain things that are out there, and I'm afraid it's not going to let me do that because I'm in here as SA and trying to make some changes. But this enables me to make a decision as to whether or not I want to include or not include things that are on the menu. So it's a cleanup utility for menus, and especially designed for those people who are the pull-down menu types as they're navigating through the system. Okay? All right. Now this one I think is offers up on here with the system tools and just kind of walk down the list as we're taking a look at them. The update user date. What we're going to do is, what this is intended to do is to quite honestly allow you as an end user to have the system date as you're walking into Great Plains update itself according to the system date as you're walking in. So the beauty of that is that Great Plains is not set at a particular date, but moving along with the date of entry as you're in and out of the software and changing from one day to the next. Okay, and in order to enable something like that, because that is done at the point of entry, okay, by checking this box here, it allows me to being able to do that. And I'm just looking for that system thing here. Yeah. If you'll turn back to your brochure for just a minute, this is one of the new tools that was added. It's after the first introduction page. It's at the top of the page called New Tools Available Only for Microsoft Dynamics GP. And it's over on the right. And with this particular selection added, what happens here is that it automatically updates at midnight. So if you're one of those late night workers and you're in a time zone where things change, and we will be faced with that change at some point in time, the date inside of Great Plains is automatically updated for you as you're in the system. With that unchecked, we know that if we were in as yesterday and we reached midnight as of this morning and crossed over into this morning, the date would still remain as yesterday. So this is part of the assurance of the system being able to keep up with the date as you've entered in, as well as you are keeping Great Plains open and having that user date follow along with the change of the system date on your computer. And that could be particularly important, especially when it comes down to using some of the reporting options out of Great Plains. If you've automated some of those reports and using some of the automated report production scheduled reports. So that becomes important for that kind of thing to occur and have that ability. Okay? All right. So let's move on down to the next set here, and we're going to go into financial tools. And I want to take a look at that one. Primarily what this is allows you to modify and combine an account, a general ledger account. And I will have to say that this has been a real popular part of the tool set, because what I'm allowed to do is take any given account that I may have that I want to take all of its data and move it over into another account that I have in my chart of accounts. So for example, what I chose here is I have my savings account, and there may be a balance in the account. There could be a series of transactions that are historical or either in my current year. And what I want to do is to move those transactions over to my petty cash account. So I have a select from which account number to a particular account number. Now the idea behind this is that once I hit the convert button, all of the transactions that fell into the savings account will become part of my petty cash account as if I had posted them all along. Balances will be moved as well as the transactions belonging to that. Okay? I have the ability to being able to choose ranges of accounts and pouring them into a particular account number if I want, or I can import a series of accounts into the system through this particular tool. So let's just take a look at this for just a minute, and let's do an inquiry on my savings account out here. Now, I may not have any data out here for that, but I'm checking. Okay, so I do. So there's back in 2014, and by the way, I'm in the Fabricam company here, and I'm looking at balances. I have transactions belonging to that as well. So if we drill down, we can see that there's transactions belonging to the savings here. Okay. All right. And what I want to do is to combine all those transactions into my petty cash account, because my motivation here is I'm no longer going to use my savings account. Now typically what this meant was that I would have to write a journal entry to move a balance from one account to another. But I couldn't necessarily get rid of the account because there was history behind it. And if it had transactions for the current year, of course, to inactivate the account, I do have to wait till the end of the year in some cases, depending upon what the nature of the account is. So you've seen transactions inside of the savings account as well as in the petty cash account. My motivation here is I want to move everything over to savings, from savings into petty cash, as if that was my intentions all along. So let's go back to the tool, okay? And what I'm going to ask to do is I'm going to convert, okay? They ask me whether or not I want to continue, and I will continue, okay? Continue. If you're combining accounts and using intercompany transactions, please log into the other companies with intercompany transactions and post the intercompany batches prior to proceeding, okay? For those of you who are using intercompany, this is something that you will need to do following the combination because of the intercompany type of transactions that are being held. If you don't have intercompany, then this message is really not something you need to follow up on. So let's go ahead and hit continue here. And again, the speed at which this happens is dependent upon the size of the database, as well as the speed of the processor. So I've got one drive out there that keeps reminding me that it's a little low in space. So we're waiting. Something that you need to go back and look into each module to see whether or not there's additional changes that you need to make. This is actually taking care of all modules across the board that has any kind of general ledger reference to the savings in the petty cash account here. Now I do have an awful lot of modules loaded up, so what it's doing here is it's taking a look at all the software that I have installed for Great Plains and making sure that it has completed its business in converting that savings account over to the petty cash. Okay, all right, so that's complete. Okay, then it tells me that I need to go back and reconcile years. Again, that is for the purpose of making sure that the balances that were updated all got updated appropriately, and that is just a short system function under system routines. So let's just take a look at this real quick. I'm going to go back and do an inquiry to see how successful I was with that. Okay. So let's first look at the savings account. and I don't believe I see it there anymore, the 1140 account. Okay, so we know that it's not there. So it also took care of the elimination of that account as well. Now, if I needed to put it back in place for whatever reason, I could re-enter it. But let's just take a look at this and see where we're at. Now, I don't recall all the balances that we had out there, but we should have all the transactions that were belonging to the savings account now in that particular petty cash account, along with the balance updates. Okay? Pretty cool. It's like 2014 is the one that I have out there. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. Minor and modifier. Okay. Now I can also take an existing account and have it create another account with all the transactions and balances, as if all of the transactions to appear to have gone into the account, the destination account. All right. And there is a report that generally follows after that, and you can see that it says its starting account was 1140 and ending in 1130, and it was the action to combine. Okay. All right. So let's go back to the tools and continue on. Checkbook modifier, let's take a look at that. For those of you who are modifying and have multiple checkbooks and you want to move transactions from one checkbook to another, this is what this is intended to do. So if you're merging accounts, particularly checkbooks, this will take a starting and ending checkbook ID and convert that into another checkbook. You know, I don't know how many times that you might be faced with something like that, particularly if we have banks that change or you're moving from one bank to another. You probably would not, I suspect, want to make merges of checkbooks, but particularly if you're wanting to merge checkbooks together, you have that ability being able to do that if you're staying within the same bank. Okay, fiscal period modifier. Okay, what this is intended to do is to allow you to set up new fiscal periods within the year and also adjust past fiscal years in terms of beginning and ending start dates. So particularly if you are going to be moving from a fiscal to a calendar year or from a calendar year to a fiscal year, there's some considerations in terms of how you modify those fiscal existing periods that you have set up in Great Plains. This allows you to being able to cleanly move transactions, historical as well as open, to different beginning and ending start and end periods, especially when you are in the business of having to change from fiscal to calendar. This also, again, allows you to set up new fiscal periods much the same way as what the company calendar allows you to do. But you do have that ability within the fiscal period modifier to getting that kind of thing done. So we've had a couple of clients who needed to modify their year end because they're moving from fiscal to calendar. And part of that meant having to get into the SQL tables to make those kind of changes. And with the modifier here, this turns out to be something that the system administrator over the Great Plains system can do on their own. Okay? All right. GeoMaster triggers. Okay? The purpose of this is to take data and replicate to other companies. So in other words, if you're in the business of setting up new companies within Great Plains and you need some of the master record data that is in one company and you want to move that master record data without having to import it in with an import tool or either hand key it into the company that you're setting up, you have that ability to being able to identify a from company and to a different company that you have set up, general ledger accounts, vendors, or customers. So for example, and this may take a little while again, you know, because I've got some fairly large pieces of data that I'm working here, is that if I took my motorcycle company that I had here and in the World Online company or the Fabricam data, I wanted to move the chart of accounts, this would be the process of me being able to do that. Now, balances will not follow either from accounts, vendors, or customers, but I have the ability of being able to take the chart or the vendors or the customers and move them over from one company to another. Okay. Okay, would any of you like to see that demonstrated? Anyone there? Okay. All right.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
You're good. Okay, is everyone clear on that one? Okay. All right. You're going to find the master triggers also available as we saw here for RM. That would be receivables management. You can see the same kind of thing, as well as payables has the same thing here as well as the PM master triggers. So the GL master triggers, the PM master triggers, and the RM master triggers pretty much all do the same thing. It's just depending upon what the nature of the type of data and what data it is that you're wanting to move from the target company to the destination company. Okay? All right. We'll move into the purchasing side of things here. And I want to talk a little bit about the 1099 modifier. Okay. What this is going to allow you to do is to change documents that are in your system that you did not mark as 1099, or if you've incorrectly set up vendors in your system that were not marked at the beginning of the year for 1099 purposes. So as an example, I might set up a vendor at the beginning of the year, or for that matter, for any time throughout the year. And when setting up that vendor, I didn't mark the vendor as a 1099 vendor. Okay? So if I pull up a vendor here, and we'll take a look at that, we'll go into options. All right? And you'll notice that here is a really important piece of information that I identify because the default when I set up a vendor is set for 1099. I literally have to make sure that I change it to either a miscellaneous interest or dividend type vendor. And then furthermore, especially around the version 9 days where this began to change, I also have a box that I need to identify as to where that amount is going to appear when I accumulate that data and print out 1099s. Now the problem with this is that if you forgot to mark that Ace Travel Company as a 1099 vendor and consequently began to put in transactions during the year and later found out that you failed to mark the vendor as a 1099, you quite literally had to go into the summary of the vendor and update them. Let me pull that up here real quick. Go into 1099 details and plug the amounts in so that it was accurately reflected in terms of the accumulation of 1099. Now, you don't have transactions to back that up with, but you at least had to go in and visit each one of the vendors because eventually at the end of the year you were going to print out the 1099s. So what this allows you to do with this particular tool is to go back and identify in a given year the vendors and their documents as to which one of them are 1099s. Okay? Tools. I don't know that any of you that are online with me today or here visiting with us today run certified payroll reports. But this particular report here is not something that I run within Great Plains, but I turn it on so that it becomes available during transaction entry inside of payroll so that I can accumulate data for the payroll certified report. So that's what those checkboxes are. I either turn them on and they become available internally within the software, or either they are not available within the software, but I am authorized to use them. Does that answer the question, Bob?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
You bet. Okay. All right. Okay, so we finished up with the 1099 modifier. We talked a little bit about the PM master triggers. On the PM minimum check, what this particular tool does is allows you to pick a minimum amount for your payable checks created through the select checks process. It will prevent any checks being created under the minimum amount. So in other words, what this is that if I turn this on, it becomes available during the select check routine within Great Plains. I can set a minimum amount of which I am going to pay, and then anything that falls below that will not become part of my overall check run. Okay, kind of a unique one. All the days that I've been dealing with PM, the tool set, we've talked about minimum checks, minimum requirements for vendors, and so forth. This one has not necessarily come up, but I do find it a very interesting one. Okay. Okay. The Select Checks Combiner tool allows me to select multiple batches of checks. So in other words, if I have two or more folks out there that are involved with the check printing process, and I have two or more batches that are ready to print checks from. So for example, I go into purchasing, and I'm going to go in and go into select checks. And for those of you who are payables orientated, I think this screen should look somewhat familiar to you. But in order for me to do this, I need to set up a batch of which we'll go through, and based on the criteria that I have here selected in this particular screen, we'll build the batch of selected vouchers that I'm going to pay. Now, if for some reason that there's another person who's also been involved with the process of selecting checks, and I'd like to combine, in this case, both of these batches for check printing, what that would have meant prior to this tool is that one of these batches would have had to been removed, and then I would have had to gone back and reselected the batch that I was wanting to print checks from and add to the batch. So the tool actually would allow me to combine both of these batches together should I have both of them setting out there. And it could have been that maybe I might have been the only one user that set up both of the batches, and now I just need to combine them under one, because we know this about check printing within accounts payable is that we only process one batch at a time. I could quite literally pull both of these batches together with the combiner tool and combine them both together under one batch. Okay? All right. The vendor combiner. This one has become a very popular one, as is the customer combiner and modifier. So both of these have become pretty important, especially for those people who have really shown interest in the tools. And you know, I would have loved a long time ago when I was using Great Plains back in my business, when Ma Bell was changing its name around and become, I think, AT&T, if I remember correctly. And I had this foreboding name of Michigan Bell out there, so I wound up having to create two different vendor accounts. So what I can, you know, if I use the modifier, I could have moved from one vendor ID to another, or I could have combined two or more vendors together that actually merged together or either had some sort of commonality about them. This one's a pretty easy one to use from a combiner point of view, and it is very similar to the thing that we were talking about in General Ledger in terms of combining accounts or modifying accounts. What I have to do here is I have to identify a starting vendor. Okay? In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Ace Travel Company, okay, and I'm going to combine it into, we'll take Beaumont Construction. For all appearances, they do appear a little different in terms of what they do. We have a construction company and travel company, but Ace Travel has actually just now been bought out by Beaumont. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge these two together as if they were always under Beaumont Construction. So again, it goes back to the same kind of thing where all activity under ACE Travel, that would be current as well as historical data, will get moved over to Beaumont as if these transactions had originated out of Beaumont, and including all of their balances, historical as well as current. So let's just take a look at that. First of all, let's go back and take a look at ACE Travel, and we'll do a quick inquiry on them, so at least we can get a mind's eye in terms of the activity that's been out there for them. Okay. All right. And I'm going to pick out this particular invoice just to say that what I'm hoping to see is this particular invoice is going to wind up under Beaumont as well. But here is some of ACE Travel's activity. I don't know if there's anything that's unposted out here. We can take a look at that. Okay, there is one document that's unposted. Looks like we have a lot of unpaid invoices out here. That's what we see here. And of course, we've got an awful lot of history out here as well, belonging payments as well as an invoice. Okay. Now, the balances that I have out here, and I'm going to take just a slightly different approach here, is under summary, having to do with ACE Travel. There we are. Okay. And you can see the aging side of things. And if I go into yearly, I can choose a particular year and show some amounts. Looks like they got $50 that they paid year to date here. Okay. In contrast to that, let's just take Beaumont, take a look at them. Okay. Looks like they don't have anything outstanding from what I can tell here so far. Yearly, as amounts since last close, but let's just take a look at their calendar year. We'll calculate that on 2017. Doesn't look like they have anything going on year to date in terms of billed or paid. All right, so let's combine these two together. Okay, and we'll convert from ACE Travel into Beaumont. Before running this process, you need to make sure a SQL Server backup of your company data is in place. Now, why in the world would we want to do that? Well, maybe we found out after combining these two vendors together that wasn't something we wanted to do after all, so how would we get back to the way we were? Well, that would be as only if we had a backup out there. Okay, so we want to make sure we got a good backup, and then once we've done that, we'll hit the combine here and continue. So again, you know, the amount of time that this takes is really going to be dependent upon the speed and the amount of data that it needs to plow through, particularly having to do with ACE Travel, and as it goes through and combines. So this looks like it's a pretty quick process out here. So let's go out and let's take a look and see what we wound up with here. So I'm going to, again, this is just the report as to what took place. We'll take a look at transactions by vendor. Okay, notice that ACE Travel is no longer there. Okay, and let's go down to Beaumont Construction. Okay, and I think that was the invoice, if I recall correctly, that was belonging to ACE Travel that has now become part of Beaumont. Okay, let's take a look at one other thing. Under purchasing, summary, we'll take a look at Beaumont Construction. Okay, we've got a balance that's over. Yearly, let's take a look at the calendar year and we'll calculate. And as I recall, if things worked as I expect them to, I may need to run a reconcile to clear up any summary balances that might be in question. But if I calculate, there's that $50 that Beaumont did not have prior to the combining of ACE Travel. So now the $50 is actually shown as having been paid by Beaumont Construction, whereas that was not the amount before the combining. Okay. Now again, this is very, very interesting as to how this all takes place when it runs. You notice it was just a few seconds that took place as to converting that, and again, that goes back to the amount of data and the speed of my system. But if you just had any inkling as to the number of tables across all the software that needed to be updated and updated appropriately, I don't think that anyone who has a lot of SQL capabilities being able to do that effectively and as quickly as what we did it here. Okay? All right. Let's take a look at the vendor modifier. Okay? And essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking an existing vendor and I'm creating a brand new vendor. So this would have worked in my example of where Ma Bell was going away and becoming AT&T. So for example, let's just take Advanced Office Systems here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a new vendor ID for Advanced Office Systems. And I'm just going to call this Advan 002. We'll just call it that for right now. Okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert Advanced into Advan 002. Okay, again, the message is to SQL Server. And modifiers finished. Let's take a look and see what our results were after that message. Oop, got a report here that's going to come out at us. Okay, so Advanced 001 has now become Advan 002. And let's just take a look at that. There is Advanced Office System under a different user, under a different name. Now, I do have that ability, being able to change the name of the vendor to maybe a more appropriate one, but the idea is that particularly if my vendor ID was not an appropriate ID for the vendor anymore, I would have the ability of being able to change that while still retaining all of the information belonging to Advanced Office Systems and any kind of transactional activity that might have occurred over time belonging to Advanced 001. So we'll take a look at that, and I realize we didn't take a look at their historical data prior to doing it, but all that data was moved under a different vendor ID. Okay?
Which module is this? Is this the vendor modifier?
Yes, that was the vendor modifier. Yep. The question that came out was this the vendor modifier? Yeah, this is the vendor modifier that actually just allows you to move from one ID to another, whereas the combiner allows you to take two vendors and combine them into one. Okay? Okay. Vendor name modifier. Okay. We can change an existing vendor name to a new vendor name with a click of a button. Okay. All work and open and history records are updated seamlessly. Now, why this one becomes particularly important is for this reason, is that it was Advanced Office Systems, and now maybe they become behind Office Systems, okay? All right? And anything that might have been stored in any one of the tables that also included the Advanced Office Systems name, and I'm not saying not only the vendor card, but any other tables that might have retained this name, particularly having to do with maybe check data, will now go out and look for Advanced Office Systems and change that to Behind Office Systems. So we'll convert that. Again, the same message. Pardon me. I'll close. We should get a report here. And we'll go out and check that name. I know that we'll have that definitely from the card level. So, oops, I opened up sales by mistake there. Let's go to cards, purchasing, vendor. Okay. And there it is. Okay. Now we are Behind Office Systems. Okay. All right. And again, any other tables that might have been holding that name out there could be purchasing tables as an example. If you're a purchase order user, it could be some of your check data for past checks that might have been processed earlier. Also may have been holding a name out there. So now by the modifier name allows us to make those kind of changes. Okay? All right. So that finishes up the purchasing tools. Well, we've got a couple of over here that really actually are more in line with purchase order. And I don't recall whether or not we have any purchase order users out there, but these two tools, the second one here in this list at the top here is actually a new one that was added to the version 11 software, but the minimum PO receipt number it prevents purchase order processing from defaulting the next PO number or receipt number to a number that was previous to the current PO number. So what part of the issue was, particularly if you were a PO user or you were in the PO receiving process, is that when you go in and put a PO into the system, okay, and I tab off of that, the PO number automatically advances to the next PO number. Now, there wasn't really any way of that I can recall that you could come in and not change that to a prior number. So, for example, if that number had not been used, or if it had been used, we go back into a change mode, of course, just like you see here. But if a number might have been skipped, we couldn't go back to any one of the prior numbers. What that meant is that this particular number would have gotten restored back into the PO setup side of things. And let me take you there for just a second, where when we first set up PO number processing, we actually define what the next PO number is. So this field right here constantly gets updated as PO numbers get put, as you go through the purchase order process and new purchase orders that are entered into the system. And if for some reason that someone changed the PO number while entering in a new PO back to a prior number or an unused number, this number would get reset back to that as well, and we'd wind up with some duplicity or some errors saying, hey, this is a duplicate number. So the whole idea behind the minimum PO number and receipt number is to prevent whatever this number is being stored in the setup, a user cannot digress and use a prior number to what's being stored here. And especially if you are a heavy purchase order user within the system, that kind of tool alone and having that facility turned on by the tools is certainly well worth its money spent. Okay. Yes? That one's free? Oh, yeah, it is free. Thanks, Christine. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Christine just noted that that happens to be a free one that they give to you no matter what tool that you buy. The purchase order processing cost defaulter. When you put a purchase order into our system, and again, just assuming we have some purchase order users out there, let me just kind of tab around here for just a moment. And I'm in the business of putting in a PO. And I would have an item that I would enter in that I'm going to place on order. And pardon me for just a couple of seconds here. All right, and once I put the item in that I was ordering, the system actually comes up with the suggested purchase price as to what I am going to purchase this at. Now, it allows me to override that based on what my vendor told me that I'm going to have to pay for the product, but if you are using our inventory system, the question comes down to where does that amount come from? Okay, and that amount actually comes from the current cost field here. That's $16,000. Let me just tie that back to the purchase order. That's where the $16,000 came from. So in a normal course of things, when entering in a purchase order, the system pulls on the current cost. With the new tool, professional tools, we have the ability of saying, no, we don't want to use current cost, but we want to use what's called standard cost. And particularly if you're in a manufacturing environment or you have items that you've set up in your inventory where there is a set cost, there might be a catalog price that you normally get, that you view out of the catalog from where you order product from. This would be the standard cost. The current cost really represents the last cost in which you bought the product. So you may want to, when you're first putting a purchase order together, have it pull the standard cost because it is a static cost that's entered in when setting up the inventory item. And this particularly does become important especially when it comes time when you're receiving the product and you find that you're paying more than what you did last time. It could be because the item was on sale, or maybe that you had some sort of discount that was available to you only for that particular purchase time. So the PO is not clearly representative of what your actual and true cost is outside of the last cost that you paid for it. And that's what the purchase order cost defaulter is. You choose between using current cost or standard cost when you're putting the PO into the system. Okay? All right. Let's stop for just a second and find out if there's any questions. By the way, it's time to break bread, everyone, so if you have any tasting, I'm going to move on into the sales tools. I presume that there are no questions having to do with the purchasing tools. Probably pretty straightforward for most of you. And, you know, we're kind of moving into an area of some things that are beginning to look a little duplicated from things that we might have seen on the other side of the coin, that is from the purchasing or general ledger. And we kind of talked about similarly these following three tools here that belong to the sales tools, but were for purchasing. And the whole idea is pretty much the same in terms of how they work. The customer combiner allows you to combine one customer into another. The customer modifier allows you to create a brand new customer ID out of an existing customer ID. Both those tools allow you to move data as if the data had originated out of the destination ID that you had set up. And then, of course, the customer name modifier. This one is an important one as well, especially if you're changing the name of a customer and you'd like to have it reflected through all tables. And it may not necessarily be enough for you to change the name at the customer card level, because past historical data may have already saved some of the old customer name. And I can think of one just right off the bat. I think on the vendor side has to do with purchasing, because we can establish, you know, who the purchase order vendor is, and we can make some changes there. But on the sales order side, for those of you who are using our sales distribution system, the sales order captures the customer name as it is in that point in time. So the customer name modifier would work well, especially if that name changed and you wanted just more than the customer card's name to change, and you wanted the other tables that were in the system that were connected to past historical data to have that name changed as well. Okay. The RM master triggers, we talked about that when we were talking about general ledger. Again, this allows you to copy master records out of one company into another, thereby you avoiding having to hand key or import data back into a new company that you might have set up. So we have a company that we're originating from, and then we're replicating to one of my other destination companies. And then, of course, we choose whether or not it's general ledger accounts or vendors or customers. Okay. All right. Now, the RM transaction unapplied. This one is a pretty darn interesting one. This one allows you to actually go back and unapply applied documents that's set in history. I believe this was a new one that was added, if I recall. I'm going to go back and just check. Let's see here. And no, I don't think so. It's not on my list, but honest to goodness, I don't remember seeing this before unless I just ignored it. But I find this one to be a quite interesting one, particularly when you want to go back into the historical tables and automatically move the records back into the open table, allowing you to reapply the records that you want to apply. Okay? Now, so maybe the scenario is like this. Maybe I have a credit memo that might have applied to a sales document, whether it be receivable or a sales distribution document, and I've applied it, and then I've moved it to history, which is part of the process that we conduct on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, is to move paid transactions to history. Well, once we've moved those transactions to history, we did not have the ability to go through and unapply any of those documents. But with this tool, we have the ability of taking those transactions along with their accompanied apply to documents, checks, and credit memos, and unapply them, and therefore bringing those documents out of history back into open, so that we can apply more appropriately checks and credit memos to those invoices, and thereby allowing us to move them to history and have them appear as we want them to appear. So even for that matter, even if there is for some reason that we need to drag a transaction out of history, and it may not necessarily be for the unapply reason, I think this tool has a formidable place to being able to allow you to do that. Because if you have practiced that procedure, and that is moved pay transactions to history, you know that there is nothing that you can do with those transactions once they've arrived in history. That is, you can't void them, you can't change any part of them, with this tool, it may open up some possibility for you. Okay? All right, salesperson modifier. Salesperson modifier is kind of along the same lines as the vendor modifier, the customer modifier, as well as the account modifier. What this allows us to do is take a salesperson ID, and again, this is part of the sales part of the distribution system, where in a sales order, and let me just start over here real quick and kind of give you a perspective, is under sales transaction entry, if you are using sales transaction entry, and I choose a customer to whom I'm going to be selling to, okay, the customer and the salesperson ID is assigned at the customer's record and follows through on the sales order. Now, of course, I have the ability to assign a different salesperson that might be responsible for this particular sale, but let's say, for example, Paul W. is no longer going to be Paul W., and we need to modify Paul W. to actually a number because we're moving to a numbering system. So when we set up Paul W., here was Paul West. Here's a salesperson ID, some address information, and commissions year-to-date, commission sales, non-commission sales, cost of sales. This is the kind of data that's kept in our sales distribution system, but we need to renumber Paul W. to something different. So let's do that real quick so we can take a quick peek at that and how that might work. Okay, so we're going to change Paul W., who is now going to become Paul 123. I struggled with that. I wanted to call him Paolo. Change countries or something. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert Paul W. to Paul 123 because we're renumbering our salespersons. Okay, again, the same message about backing up. This is going through all of the sales records if you're a manufacturer user, also the manufacturing records, anything that might be related to any kind of sales data, receivables, sales order distribution, manufacturing, and where the Paul W. was noted during the transaction has now become Paul 123. So again, same kind of message report that we get that the change was made. What we should be able to do is go back in to Aaron Fitz Electric and look at their customer card and look to whom the salesperson that is assigned, and you can see that now we, instead of Paul W, is Paul 123. And if we go into their maintenance card, there we are as well. So Paul West has now got a new ID called Paul 123. So maybe this is the time to beg the question, is saying, well, okay, you know, these are nice little tools, but why in the world would people even want to desire to make these kind of changes? Well, because they've had the system for a while, and the business processes in the company have changed, needs have changed, who you're doing business with have changed. There's a myriad of reasons why we need to go back and make those kind of changes, and oftentimes what that meant is that in the case of Paul W., and now we were going to move to Paul 1, 2, 3, as oversimplistic as that may sound, is that we would have to set up a secondary record and call it Paul 1, 2, 3, even though it was Paul West, because we were renumbering our salespeople. We started renumbering them with their first name and their first initial of their last name, and found out that was inappropriate, inefficient, it wasn't working for us anymore, and now we needed to make the change. So we would have to set up a secondary record and forget about all those historical records that Paul W. was on. Now I've got Paul 1, 2, 3, and there may not necessarily be a connection between Paul 1, 2, 3 and Paul W., especially when we're looking at historical records. So if we can combine them, or at least renumber them in this case, that could certainly be very, very helpful from a reporting aspect. And that's eventually what it all comes down to. So we got a question here, Tracy. Yeah.
I'm wondering, would this be the area? Okay, let's say.
Just in case some of you couldn't hear, the first question is that we understand that the salesperson modifier is a way for us to change the ID, but it also changed historically. If what we do is create, and hopefully I understood your question here, is that if what we do is we create a brand new user record for a salesperson that might be handling now Aaron Fitz Electric, and call it Paul 1, 2, 3, but it happens to be, instead of Paul West, this happens to be Paul East, if you will, two different people. Paul East will begin to accumulate records as we do business with Aaron Fitz Electric, but Paul W. and the history of Paul W. will still remain in place. And that would be as if we didn't do any kind of salesperson modification. Is that okay? So the next question came up with is that what about the territory modifier and combiner? The territory modifier and the combiner are similar to what we saw happen with the customer combiner and modifier, as well as the payables vendor combiner modifier, is that we can combine territories from one territory to another, and also combine territories together. But what happens if, let's say, for example, Paul West is assigned to a territory, and I'll go down to salesperson. Okay, and we see that Paul was assigned to territory 7, but what if territory 7 becomes territory 8? Will Paul, and I don't have the right person up here again, let's go back just a quick second, I'll get Paul West up on here. There we are. Okay, so I'm sorry, Paul is assigned to territory 1. So what if territory 1 becomes territory 11, let's say, for example? Does that mean that Paul, who was once at territory 1, inherits everything belonging to territory 11? And the answer to that question is yes. Okay? If, for example, that we're going to combine territory 1 and 2 together, and Paul was assigned territory 1, will he inherit also territory 2 in that change? And the answer to the question is because we're combining in that case. Okay? All right. Good questions. All right. So I think that you all, I will presume at this point, unless there's some questions out there, I will presume that the territory modifier and combiner pretty much fits with your understanding of the customer combiner and vendor combiner as well. So we'll not practice with those anyway right now at this point. Okay, SOP number check. Okay. Let me just turn to that real quick here. Yeah, the SOP number PO check is a free one, and it's also new belonging to 11. So if you're on 10, you get the tools, you're not going to get this one because it's not available, but only under 11 going forward. For those of you who are wondering what SOP is and PO is, SOP stands for Sales Order Processing, PO stands for Purchase Ordering. So we were taking a look at those two screens just a little earlier. This is our sales order transaction entry screen, and for those of you who are not familiar with this, this is where we put quotes, orders, invoices into the system. We identify customers and we sell things to them. We do have clients that are using the sales order system even if they don't have things or an inventory to sell, but simply want to use this as an invoicing screen to their customers. It can work very well with that. Now, the purchase order screen, which is what I had up on earlier, we'll take a look at that. This is the purchase order screen, and essentially what this was designed to do is to serve as a formalizing of a purchasing process with a vendor and to identify items that you're going to buy to fulfill inventory requirements, or it could be used if you're not an inventory user, but to identify services and non-inventory products that you're buying and want to formalize the invoicing process. Where this particular comes in to play, and I'm going to, it's kind of screaming at me here wanting me to finish up with what I started on that, so bear with me for just a second. All right, and I'm going to see if I can just delete this and we'll start. Okay, good. Okay, where this particular tool comes in is having to do with when a customer, in this case, gives you, sorry, this is a PO number check. I'm sure because we have two of those out there. Hang on just a second, folks. Okay, PO SOP number check. Okay, I was looking at the wrong one here. Anyway, the SOP PO number check is to verify the PO numbers for duplicates. So when I am putting in a purchase order, excuse me, a sales order, and I identify the customer to whom I'm selling, and that customer gives me a PO number, okay? The PO number is stored with the order, and should Aaron Fitz Electric place another order and use the same PO number, this particular utility will prevent that type of duplication. Okay? So it's to making sure that we don't enter in orders 2 or 3 times based on the same PO number, and that we do require unique PO numbers in our business, especially when we're doing business with our customers. So that's part of what that whole utility is all about. When we go back and look at it, and I turn that on, that's what the system will now begin to check on as orders get placed through the sales order program, is to making sure that when we do business with Aaron Fitz Electric and Aaron Fitz gives us a PO number, that there is not a duplicate PO number that Aaron Fitz and company will give us during the ordering process. Okay? And that particular utility is very helpful. Okay? There is another one that I just about missed up here, and is the SOP customer item lookup tool. That one is not a new one. And let me just turn to that real quick. It's under a sales series. Okay, and I'm just looking for its reference here, and for whatever reason I don't see it listed. Okay. It's under SOP, is under payroll? Oh, inventory. All right, so I'll get a little help from our friends here. All right, inventory. Page 7? Oh, here we go. All right, so it's kind of hard to see on the brochure document, but on page 7, thank you for your help there, sales order processing customer item lookup. Okay? What this particular product does for you, or this particular tool, is allows you to look up items while entering in on the sales order products that are specific to that customer and what they've ordered in the past. And it allows you to limit the view to, in this case, when I start up Aaron Fitz Electric, to only view their particular items that they've ordered in the past initially, so that it helps me out in making selections while I'm filling out the order and taking the order from Aaron Fitz Electric, that I have a list of those items that they've ordered in the past that make it easy for me to select from because they're placing replicate orders. Okay? So that particular tool, with that turned on, becomes activated within the sales order program and allows me to narrow my view when I'm doing a lookup. Okay? All right. Let's go back to professional tools. And I think we've covered all the sales tools, at least where we're at so far. So let me stop and just ask everyone, are there any questions about any of the sales tools that we've covered that anyone might have questions about? State the question just in case you didn't hear Tracy's question here. Having to do with the sales order processing customer item lookup, the last one that we just covered. Her question was this, in just trying to clarify the understanding as to how this works. Does the history build over time so that I begin to accumulate historical information about the customer in terms of what they ordered, their specific price that they paid, and provide that as lookup information? Or is that something that I can build without having to first have history build itself? And the answer to the question is this begins to build once this item is turned on, and history begins to build from there, of which will begin to build the list from which you can select from. Okay? There is, just kind of a corollary to that, there is another ISV or a company that's put together a product that hooks into sales order processing that quite literally allows you to set up special pricing for a customer and special items that you know that they're going to look up. Yep. And particularly that comes up when you are looking at very large inventory, quantity items out there, numbers of items, and you need to limit that view. Okay, good question. Was there another question out there? I thought I might have heard someone about to ask a question. Don't want to miss anybody out there. Again, I pointed out a little earlier about the certified payroll report, but I'm going to jump back into that again. Identifying the certified payroll report is something that is primarily involved in the construction industry, where they have certain wages that need to be identified for special kinds of reporting purposes back to unions or back to the government, making sure that certain wage requirements are being complied with. So the certified payroll report is not part and parcel of the Great Plains system, but in order for the certified payroll report to work, which is provided by the tools, it does make a modification to the payroll data entry during payroll entry, and essentially allows you to identify times that will be earmarked as part of the certified payroll report. So for those of you who are involved with payroll to any degree and using our payroll system, the area, and I don't know that we'll see this on my screen now, because in order to use some of these tools that wind up being a part of the program and showing themselves through the program usually requires an exit from Great Plains and back in, so they're activated once you've turned the tool on. And we don't see it here, but essentially there's another field that winds up being added here to accommodate for the certified payroll report that is accumulating information during the payroll transaction entries portion of this that later will wind up becoming part of the certified payroll report from the reporting options inside of payroll. So I'm not going to go too much further into that unless there's someone out there who wants to know a little more about it, and we can talk about that offline, because there is a few extra things that we have to do to turn on that report within Great Plains from a security point of view. The employee modifier in this case is very much in line with our payables and receivables in terms of modifying, is that you can take an employee with an ID that they currently have and give them an entirely new ID. And this could come into play especially when you've set up all your employees according to some sort of nomenclature belonging to their name. You have a person who might get married who their last name may change, and you need to line up their ID toward the way in which you ID employees in your business based on first and last name as an example. And then you can take all of their data belonging to the old ID and put it under to a new ID and show it as if it had been that way all along. And again, this goes back to all the work tables, open tables, as well as anything historically. And if any of you have worked with our payroll system, that you know that there's quite an extensive payroll table list out there, and especially with some of the new features that they added to version 9 and as well as in 10, and the enhancements really began to expand on where we see signs of the employee showing up in the payroll system. So this one may take just a few extra minutes, and there we are. And let's close this, and we'll just take a look to see if that got changed. And I think it was Pilar Ackerman. And we will go back to Great Plains and go into cards, go to payroll, employee. We'll do a lookup here, and Pilar Ackerman now is AXX001. And any other records belonging to Pilar will now have that ID there as well. Okay. Okay, moving on to inventory. Many of these are somewhat similar to what we saw in sales and purchasing, but they are more specific to the inventory part of the system, having to do with combiners and modifiers. And some of this may seem a little esoteric for those of you not using our inventory system, but in our inventory system, when we set up a brand new item in inventory, we also set up what are called sites. And sites you can think of as in terms of warehouses where we might be able to find inventory, because part of our inventory system keeps track of quantity on hand on a per site location. So if you are using that portion of the inventory for multi-sites, and it happens to be that possibly the Detroit and Flint site that we keep our inventory at as a second and third location aside from our Lansing location, we need to combine Detroit and Flint together. That's part of what the combiner does. Or if Flint suddenly becomes Holly, Michigan, we moved the warehouse site from there, we can use the modifier in order to do that. And again, the same kind of idea would be any corresponding records, transactionally or master record card information follows with whatever we're combining and modifying. Description. Here's a real good example of what we were talking about on the customer's point of view and the vendor's point of view in purchase order processing, sales order processing. But the inventory, whenever we are entering an item on our sales order transaction entry screen and our purchase order transaction screen, we have the ability of changing descriptions. So we can have the modifier catch up with all of the transactions that included an item in inventory whereby the item description has changed. So in this case, this particular item ID is called the multi-core processor and would be stored in its description as a multi-core processor as we sold it, as we purchased it. And if we chose to change the name from multi-core processor to single-core processor, all of the records belonging to this particular ID holding that particular description would also change in like kind. Again, that's part of what that tool is all about. Okay. All right. Item number, combiner, item number, modifier. Very much the same thing as what we saw as for the vendor ID and the customer ID and the GL account modifier and combiner. The item reconciler, this is particularly important when you want to narrow down on a particular item in inventory and you're trying to reconcile its quantities and even across different sites. In other words, what this is attempting to do is to making sure that all the detailed transactions belonging to items in your inventory, or an item for that matter, all of the ins of that item, that is your purchases into inventory for that item, as well as the outgo of the inventory item, are matching up with the quantities that are being reported within the item card. So for example, if I look at an item in inventory and I go down to item quantity sites, okay, you can see that here's the multi-core processor for all sites. I have 0 on hand, but I do have 2 allocated. Whoop. A little fat finger there on my screen and my mouse. And all of the other types of quantities that are being kept about this item, whether or not they're back ordered, are they on requisition, are they on PO order, how many have been returned, damaged in service and in use. All of that kind of stuff is reconciled with the reconciler, making sure that the detail backs up with what we see here in the summary figures. Okay, and there are some of those warehouses that I was referring to and how we keep track of them as we rotate from one warehouse to another. Okay, all right. Then back to here again, and I think that will pretty much cover the inventory tools portion of that. Does anyone have any questions about inventory and the tools there? Okay. Bob's question was that does the employee modifier modify all throughout HR and anything that might be remotely connected with payroll where the employee ID has been noted in the tables? And the answer to that question is yes, and including HR. Down into the miscellaneous tools here, and miscellaneous meaning that they're kind of fit in different places throughout the program. And I would suspect as time goes on, we'll probably find as the tools team come out with more and more tools that this area is probably going to be filled. And let me just stop for just a moment. For those of you who really are finding a lot of interest in these tools, and you might find something that you wanted to change in the system that's not being offered in these tools. One of the things that Great Plains has always stood for in the past as well as even today is that they love suggestions. And if there's anything out here that maybe is not within the realm of a tool that you'd like to see and you'd like to suggest it to Great Plains, they are certainly welcome and willing to hear what you have as a suggestion. In fact, we've had some clients that have made suggestions where we've seen those features come up in the software. So it doesn't fall on deaf ears whatsoever. Okay? All right. Fixed asset modifier. For those of you who are using fixed assets, this is where we can take a given asset that we have, okay? And let's just say, for example, this happens to be the office desk, okay? And we want to change it to a different number, okay? And this is very similar to what you saw earlier in the sales and the inventory, as well as the general ledger and payables, where we can actually change an asset ID into a different ID. And it really comes down to preference. We started out with this numbering system, and it's no longer working for us, so we need to go back and make these changes, but we don't want to give up history and have some of the old history out there reflecting the old number where we have the new number that's coming in. The beauty of this is all the depreciation records follow along with this particular asset number. So if I were to change it from 0001 to Office 1, anything that I would look up having to do with that office piece of equipment would then be reflected as this new ID as Office 1. Okay? All right. I think that one, the default add item is a new one, and it is free. So our next one in line here is the default add item. This goes back to purchase order processing and sales order processing. This one, and I'm looking at the second page on the brochure under new tools. This one allows you to automatically to mark an item option to be marked in sales, transaction entry, or purchase order receiving, and purchase inventory, purchase invoicing. Okay. So in other words, we can add, and I'm not sure. No, I'd have to cause a reboot here in order to see that, but it allows me to default certain items that we want to have appear in any one of those particular transactional screens having to do with sales transaction or purchase order receivings entry, and purchase invoice entry. The whole idea behind this is to make data entry much faster by you setting up certain defaults that you want to have, certain defaults items that you want to have appear here. Okay. This next one, I think, is the one that should hit and resound with everyone. Document date verify. And I believe this is also a new one, and it's free. This thing verifies the document dates to making sure that if you are using document date, you're using posting date, that posting date or batch date posting in particular, okay, that the document date is going to meet with the fiscal periods that are currently open. Right now, it doesn't do that. So if you set up a batch, and I believe this is a scenario because I was talking to another client the other day about this, we're in, let's say, for example, inside of payables, and we've set up a batch, and we're going to start entering in invoices that we're later going to post. And part of our posting options that we've set up in the very beginning is to use batch date posting, okay? So when we use batch date posting, we know that the date that we assign to the batch is going to meet, or at least be checked to making sure that it can meet within the criteria of the fiscal periods that we have currently open. It checks for that. But as far as the document dates of those documents that are put inside are not necessarily within the same date range. So let me back up for a minute and give a better example. So I have a geo posting date, batch date, that I've set up for July. And I want these documents to be entered in as of July, and inside of General Ledger. So I know the batch is going to be checked to making sure that July is an open period for me to post into. But what about those payable documents and whether or not they fit into an open period? Or for that matter, if I have a document date on a payable that has been misentered, that is in a future period that is not currently open and should not be posted to. Does the system allow you to do that? Absolutely. It'll allow you to post it anyway, okay? And it could be a closed period. So what this is going to do is to making sure that the document date is going to verify itself against all periods that are currently set up and currently open to post into. And I can't tell you enough times where I've heard from this one client where that's been a problem, because they do have some individuals who are entering in their payables and misdating their payables and winding up in periods they don't want them to enter into. So this one certainly fits the bill of being well worth the money invested in the tool. Okay, decimal place. This is particularly if you are going to use multi-decimal places in your business. And you, at the point when you are setting it up and you are using multiple decimal places during data entry, and you don't want multiple decimal places to be showing up on the check output, as an example is what they're giving here. And this happens to be a brand new tool that they've added under version 11. So what happens is that the check amount that is being displayed will follow with a normal currency 2 decimal place, even though that your system may be set up for 4 or 5 different decimal places. Okay? The last one that's listed here has to do with company copy. Now, where this may be of some value to you, or even greater value beyond the triggers, that is the PM master triggers, the GL master triggers, and the RM master triggers, this actually allows you to take a copy of an existing company and put it into a new destination company. And you can choose what you want to have put into that company. Okay? And including data and reporting options. Okay? Now, this may serve a purpose particularly if you're trying to create a test company and you want to be able to have either all or certain portions of the test company copied from your real-life company over to a test company. This also allows you to copy certain pieces of data from one company to another. That eliminates what would otherwise be deemed as duplication or having to import that kind of data into your destination company. I think this particular one is a very, very nice tool to have, especially when it comes time to setting up additional companies. If your organization is in the business of buying additional companies, adding additional companies, or for that matter, if you want to set up a test company of your own because you may have new employees that you're going to bring in for training, and that sample company serves itself well to be a good place for as a training bed. Okay, so I think that is the very last of the list of the tools that are here in the Professional Tools Service Library. Again, they've added quite a few additional tools that were not there and present in the prior version, and I'm really happy to see this particular product grow, and it is catching on with a lot of end users, particularly to those companies that adopted Great Plains several years ago and finding that they need to make some changes in their master record data. We found a lot of companies that are responding to it from that regard. But you can see there's a few things that they give to you free of charge, and there's also some other things that might be of some consideration here that might very well fit with what you've attempted to do, or possibly even going in and correcting some data if that is what you see the tool doing for you. So anyway, I want to open it up to see if there's any questions that you might have across the tool. I know that we've got one thing that we need to go back and take a look at, is adding reports to us. A shortcut out here. But anyone with questions?
I have two other questions.
Okay. Who am I speaking to?
Cecilia.
Hi, Cecilia. Okay.
Hi. How are you, Dave?
It's just probably me being me as I was navigating through here, Cecilia. On these particular tools that have these secondary check boxes here, it's not necessary to hit the radio buttons in order to activate them. They look like they're trying to do something, but they're really not. But what's critical here is that you check the box saying, and I want this to be available to me, this particular tool available to me within the software.
Okay,
So,
but isn't it on the other ones that don't have boxes and you tick the circle, check the circle, isn't that saying the same thing? I want this available to me?
Well, when I mean available to me on these ones with secondary boxes, is available to me as I'm using the software here, okay, within Great Plains. The tool on some of these other selections, let's say, for example, the customer combiner, notice that there's not a tick box there for that.
Right.
In order for me to use this tool, I have to select it, and then I use the button next in order to begin to perform the operation.
Oh,
Right.
so you're doing it right then and there.
Yes.
Versus
Whereas,
the other one, you're using throughout the system. You might use it today and you might use it tomorrow, and you don't have to keep going back in and doing it right then and there. It's always going to be available to you.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct. So notice when I click on default add item pop, which has the secondary box, my next button is grayed out. But by virtue of checking this box, exiting Great Plains, coming back into it, I have now fully activated that particular tool to operate within sales order processing and purchase order processing.
Okay.
Well, part of our problem, Cecilia, has to do with, and I go back into setup here, and this works for both SOP as well as POP. But let's see here. We'll go into purchasing. Okay. Part of what we do when we first set up the sales order processing system, the purchase order processing system, is we set up a numbering system that we're going to use to number each one of our documents. And as you well know, and all Great Plains users know, is that we're pretty number intensive or ID intensive. So when we first come in and we set up the purchase order system, we set up a nomenclature as to how it's going to number each one, in this case, each one of the purchase orders. Now, this number quite literally could be changed at any point in time to a prior number, okay? One of the things that, and one of the reasons why we number things is to avoid duplicity, because a purchase order number turns out to be a very important number for tracking purposes within the system. So in other words, if I just kind of tab around here, and I'm in my purchase order, notice how it took the next number from the setup screen that you were just in, 2075. Now that means that PO 2075, as far as the storage of this data, that number cannot be duplicated. Just cannot be. So in other words, I'll never have another PO number by 2075. When I use 2075, that number, the following number that is to be used is incremented to 2076, and then the next one, 2077, 2078. Now, if I'm coming in here, and I'm not prevented from doing this, and I'll show you, as I come in here, and I change this to 74, okay? It could be, and in this case, this number's already been used, but if it hadn't been, or maybe better yet, maybe let me demonstrate it this way. I'll tab, and I'll say instead of 7.5, it's a 7.6. And notice how it accepts that and says, okay, all right, we're going to go with 2076. So now I've just numbered the PO document 2076. Whatever happened to 2075? Well, that's an unused number. So I theoretically could finish this screen out, come back in, and the system says the next number is going to be 2077. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute, I want to go back and use 2075 because it's an unused number. So I use 2075, save it, come back in and do another PO. The system says, well, I want to do 2076. Well, it's already been used, and it says, that's a duplicate number. And I get caught up with this error saying you can't use 2076 because it's already been used. So what this tool is to eliminate you going back to a prior number and trying to use an unused number where it may have gotten lost or someone may have advanced the numbering system inside of the purchase order system or sales order system. Does that help out?
It will let you use a deleted PO, but if it's going to set you up, like let's say, 2075 was used and then.
Okay. All right. What we're, let's say, for example, in this case, Bob, is that we've got a spreadsheet of employees. And for that matter, let's just say this. We've set up a spreadsheet, old employee ID in one column, new employee ID in another, okay? The import tool will allow us to import all the, each one of the employees, old employee ID, new employee ID, and import them in and convert them all in one fell swoop.
Okay, and that answers my second question, because I wonder if you could do a range of people at the same time.
Yep.
You just do that to an import.
Yep, an import would make it nice and easy. We're all, for the most part, spreadsheet users, and as long as we can get it out into comma ASCII delimited, we should be able to satisfy the import requirements, pull it in, and convert, as opposed to handling them one by one.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any other questions out there?
I've got another one. Cecilia does.
Okay, Cecilia, go ahead.
Regarding the SOP PO number check, and I understand why you wouldn't want a customer to be able to use the same PO number, but if you're using that as a check, sometimes customers have a blanket PO. So what happens in that instance? Would you not be able to use this to check their other POs to make sure they're not duplicating if they do happen to have a blanket PO on file?
Cecilia, you cut me to the quick. I don't have the answer to that question. That's a good one. I haven't tested that.
Okay.
My guess, here's what my guess is, and I'd have to test through that. My guess is if it's a blanket PO, then all bets are off. So, we wouldn't want to prevent a blanket PO from doing what it's supposed to do, using one PO number and using that repetitively on different sales orders or invoices that are generated off of that order that you have sitting out there. But I can certainly find that out and get back with you on that to let you know. I just don't have.
I mean, we're not using it right now in our current company, but in other companies that I've worked for, they did a blanket PO so that you wouldn't have to write, you know why. So.
Yeah, oh, it's a darn good question.
Okay.
I would think, and just knowing the tools team, and they've done a great job in trying to think about every angle of how their tool, if implemented, and might impact the system. I would have to say that they've got this one covered, but I'll find out from Jenny who is the manager of the tools team.